Hello. We are still waiting for one of our guests, but we will start right now, and she will join us in a minute. Thank you very much for invitation. My name is Anna Galaskosil. I'm a curator, cultural manager. I used to work at Theatre Institute. Right now I'm a part of the team of Biennale Warszawa, Warsaw Biennial. Let me introduce our guest. Anastasia Patlay. She's from Moscow. She's a playwright, actress, and theater director. Yes, she's coming. Okay. She's mainly focused on documentary theater, and she's a director of Theater Doc in Moscow. Hello. She's also a curator of theater program. Her performances were performed on Russian and European venues, so she's got also strong experience in international collaboration. And Olga is a producer and director based in Moscow. She's a producer of New Space of the Theatre of Nations, which is an interdisciplinary project run by this Theatre of Nations. And she also works in various international art and theatre festivals and cultural projects such as New European Theatre Festival or Tolstoy Weekend Theatre Festival. And Wojtek Ziemilski, he's from Warsaw, Polish theater director and visual artist. Wojtek created many projects that are linking theater or performance with visual arts. He also studied in Portugal, among others, and he collaborated with the most important Warsaw venues like TR Warszawa, Nowy Teatr, or Komuna Warszawa. Your last performance, One Gesture, won also several international prizes. Am I right?
I've made performances after that, but basically it's all perfect.
Okay. First of all, I would like to start our panel and our discussion and not focus maybe on this panel topic at the beginning, which is origin and originality, but to link it to the main topic of the conference, mobility of aesthetics. In the publication from 2008, titled Mobility Matters, cultural mobility is defined as temporary cross-border movement of artists and other cultural professionals. Certain forms of mobility relate to individual, like networking or residencies. Others are more connected to mobility of works of performances in another countries. And mobility is not only understood as occasional movement across national borders that may be useful to gain professional experience required to career advancement as well as advance artistic endeavor, but more as an integral part of the regular work life of artists and other cultural professionals. And skipping to the more philosophical understanding of the term by Rancière, mobility helps to go from invisible sphere to perception or visibility, and it is a part of the political action, or it can be a part of political action to spoke out. And at the beginning, I would like to ask you, as mobility is a strong part of your professional life and your professional career in terms of your own artistic works that are traveling abroad, but also international collaborations that you are facing in your everyday work. Does this experience change the aesthetic of your work or artistic creation? What is the impact of this collaboration on your on you as an artist or curators? And does it help you to make visible a certain topic that you want to underline in your work? Ladies?
Okay, actually I want to start from my origin, if I can. And I actually, maybe it's quite strange, but I was born in Tashkent, and it's a capital of Uzbekistan. And my mother was born on a bank of Volga. And my father was born on a bank of Black Sea. And my grandfather was born in Moscow, but his parents were Jews from Warsaw. And from other side, my great parents were from Ukraine, etc. And I want just to say and to ask you to take in consideration that I think, in my opinion, the whole 20th century is an era of mobility, and I'm a child of mobility, and it's not something occurs just now. And I think it's very important because the era of Soviet Union was an era of huge migration flows on the territory of Soviet Union and this Eastern Europe, etc., etc. So it's not a new challenge for all of us. And yes, because the whole conference, we listened to very smart speeches, but all of them are about some new challenge for our world, but it's not it's not the same, yes. And from this point, for me, mobility is means penetration borders, and what I try to make the theater maker to do the theater maker is to find different ways to penetrate different borders. And it's very these borders between LGBT people and heterosexual people, and between German and Russian, etc. And it's not only about new migration waves from East. We, of course, now in Russia we experience these new waves from Central Asia, from Caucasus to Moscow, where I live now. But we've got a lot of examples of migrations and problems with borders in our past. So that's my concern.
And how does it influence, you know, your work as a curator, as an artist? If you say that this this presence of the migration from East, but I think that it's we could see during the presentations that most of big cities in Europe face this migration right now. In Warsaw, for example, during last 2 years, we face a huge migration from Ukraine. So do you think that it's or does it also influence your work, your thinking about your program or art that you work on?
Yes, in Theater Doc, we had a production about new migration wave. We've done with big performance, witness performance with gastarbeiters, how we call them, still. Yeah, they were on the stage and told their stories of migration and just sang their songs from Pamir. So yes, it was a brilliant production. I liked it very much. So, of course, and. But for example, I staged a documentary performance called Kantgrad, and it's about situation in Königsberg, Kaliningrad after the Second World War. And for me, it's about making a dialogue between new Soviet settlers and German people. And some people from audience perceived it like a way to build dialogue between different people. So I think that we can use different stories to talk about new challenges. Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Well, I can continue also because I'm from Belarus, and for 10 years I live in Russia, in Moscow. So during this conference, I was listening for my colleagues here, and I was thinking that probably the problem of globalization in Europe, it's not the same as the problem of globalization in former Soviet countries, for sure. It's not the same, and probably in Russia and Belarus, we should focus on the mobility of inner mobility to open our conscience and to be able to receive new experience, to be able to be open to new challenges and new cultural experience. And if to say about my personal experience, all artistic projects that I've done during my professional career, for sure it was like a huge enrichment for me. And this dialogue between countries, between different countries, is very important because just when you face with other culture, you can understand who you are.
Hello. Yeah, so we were asked to talk about our personal experiences. I have like a ton of things in my head.
I know you have a lot.
So I will try to be as personal as possible. Unfortunately, I studied philosophy for 6 years, so sometimes the personal becomes abstract and kind of like, what are you talking about? So forgive me, and if that happens, just go, hello, come back to us. So I decided to make a website, like a personal website. And the main reason is not that I think it's the most important thing you can have, is that right now, if you write my name on Google, the first thing that appears is an article from Culture.pl, which is this website from the Adam Mickiewicz Institute, this Polish institution that's supposed to promote Polish culture. And it's terrible. It's just terrible. Because what it does is, it describes my life, basically. The person who wrote it conducted 2 interviews with me, long interviews, bad interviews, and then made a text about me, which most of the facts are true. It's just an interpretation of me, which I think is ridiculous. Because the way it describes it, it shows it that I'm this cosmopolitan, artist who's lived everywhere and studied everything and been in so many places that you can't really pinpoint him. So he's all over the map, really. He's this weird thing. And that is just not true, because I've been to, of course, several places. I've lived in several places. I was born in Stanford, of all places, USA. But I spent 3 months there. And I lived in Canada, yes, but I was in high school. And I studied linguistics, applied linguistics, for a year. And that is very different from me, for instance, studying directing in Portugal with a British group. That was a really important experience for me, and that is part of who I think I am. Or it's different from being of Polish parents and considering myself Polish and feeling myself Polish. That is something which I can say, that is something that is important. And so one thing I've noticed, and I think it's something that's been kind of present here in some of the presentations here, is that it's very easy to build a kind of a general idea of a world in flux. And one example was this description of that we're all on this raft. And I think it's a terrible description. I'm sorry, I think it's a terrible description, because we're not on one raft together, unless you're talking about climate change or something which is really general, or you're talking about our transitory life as in living and then dying. The rafts we're on are very different, and they have very different stories. And so my experience has been, to a great extent, leaving the territory of this easy Baumanian, or post-Baumanian rather, idea of everything is in flux and it's a liquid identity, and we're all somewhere in it, and we're all, mobile, to really looking carefully at the things that are happening and discovering that the structures are there. They're different. There may be more dynamics, much more complex. I thought fascinating this presentation about the hairdressers, yeah? And the weird thing was, in the middle of the presentation, suddenly we hear that it's the flux, where it's everything but the flux. It's super structured. And the wonderful precision with which it was shown was amazing, that the hairdressers have a style. It's a specific style, and they have specific cultural references, and they're, to a great extent, American references, English names of American, or quasi-American ideas and ideals. They have the screens, they have the Skype, but the Skype is used in a very specific way. It's used to contact your family. And the screens, they have very specific content. They have Turkish content, yes, or content from another country where these groups either come from or with which they identify with. So it's not like anything goes. It's not like anything is possible there. Quite to the contrary. And I think my personal experience has been a lot discovering how many connections that I have are very specific connections, and how not global I am, and how not mobile. And my other thought when I was looking through the materials to this was, if we look at the title Mobile Aesthetics, or Mobility of Aesthetics, and we think of mobile, so our reference, of course, is this. We all know what I'm going to take out of my pocket. But we're all arts people, or connected to arts, and we know that the mobile, in the context of art, is kalder. You know, these installations with these little things, little forms that are on strings, and they move, and they're mobile, but there's a structure. There's a situation there which evolves. There's a movement, but this movement is something which is sometimes impossible to define, because they move in a way which we cannot predict. But we cannot predict it because it's just too complex for us. It's too difficult. And they travel sometimes very, very far in amazing ways. But there is a feeling of a reference. And this reference, you can, there was Strajal Harel as one of the examples of these artists that are so mobile that you can't find them on the map. He's not New York-based anymore. Yes, he is New York-based. Yes, he is. If you talk to him for 5 minutes, you will know that he is New York-based. Everything about him is New York-based. So I think, in a way, what Bauman at least was suggesting, and what I feel that is happening, is we're in the sea of going into this world where everything seems to be moving, but it's because we cannot handle it that we think it's all in flux. It's because it's too much. It's because I get so confused that today, yes, I was very mobile and smart, I came by bike, but I went to the Theatrical Institute, and trust me, you were not there. The world is not so liquid. So there is a place where it happens, and there is a reference where it happens. And it's sorry, I'm taking a lot of time, but it's
very
something
well.
which I think is really, really important. It's that it's not something which is just kind of, we flow out there as artists, and we just wander from one place to another, from one person to another, and it's all just like, what are we going to do now? No, we get too much information, too many things, too many references. Okay, so what are we going to do about this, and not about the fact that we've lost everything?
Yeah, I think that you touch a very interesting issue, a threat actually that this mobility issue has got. Because with new technologies, with internet, with easy transport, we can move, we can show our performances, but on one side, and this what actually was in Jona's presentation, the last one in the panel, which for me is absolutely crucial, that we live in a part of world where mobility is something obvious. We live in Schengen zone. We don't have too much problems to get visa, but we are, well, of course, you have, but this is also an issue that we have guests from the countries that are outside EU, but even between, let's say, Central and Eastern Europe, it's still not so difficult as if we looked, for example, on Middle East, African countries. These people cannot travel so easily, and this is a huge threat of mobility. But on the other hand, we all have mobile phones. We can contact easily. We can show performances or our work on YouTube via social media. And we are somehow, or our aesthetic can be mobile via new media. But there is this danger, and there is this danger of this, let's say, radical technologies.
Can I ask you a question, the two of you? Do you know of any artists in the places where you work whose aesthetics as artists developed only because they were watching things on YouTube?
Yeah.
For example, work internationally. Yes, the aesthetics didn't change because they work internationally.
So I think this is a dream. I think this is something that just doesn't happen. We don't work that way. It's like this ideal we had of TV in the 50s. You know, that TV is going to be in Africa, and all the problems of Africa are going to be solved because people are going to watch these agricultural educational programs, and they will learn how to cultivate their earth better, and this way, no problem with the food anymore.
But do you think that really with the art we can solve all these problems?
No, but I think mobility, this type of mobility, like your phone or your YouTube, is not going to. It's not an effective way of sharing aesthetics.
And for example, Bob Wilson staged Tales of Pushkin in Theatre of Nations, and it is the same Bob Wilson as when he did something in New York, in Paris, etc. And it doesn't matter. We just can watch Bob Wilson in Moscow and his view on Pushkin tales, but it's the same Bob Wilson. And as for, I wanted to mention Milo Rau. And I worked with him on a project, the Moscow Trials in Moscow. And I want to say that, of course, it was just a production of Milorau, but it was very important for us because it was about the conflict between Orthodox Church's activists and contemporary artists. And nobody in Russia could do the same. Because Milorau did 3 days theatrical trials about 3 cases, and one of them was the case of Pussy Riot, and we invited there people for Суд присяжных. Yes, jury. And it couldn't happen in modern Russia, but it happened by the case Milorau invented it. But it was a witness show, so all of not actors but participants were participants of their trials without jury. You know, so it was very important and experience. It was like a revelation, like a revenge of our artistic circles on these church activists, because these church activists are supported by the state. So they, of course, they won the real trials. But in this case, the decision of jury was like 50-50. So, thank you.
I should add something important, that Milorau isn't mobile now because he is not allowed to come to Russia after this performance. And it's very important for him as an artist, you know. And he is flexible. For instance, he just made this performance about the killing of a gay person in Liège, and I've seen it in Schaubühne. I talked to guys who produced it, and I understood that not only Milorau isn't mobile, but gay theme isn't mobile also, because it's not allowed in Russia to show a performance like this. It's an anti-gay law, so it's a question of mobility as well.
Yes, and I want to add that in April I watched the new Milorau show in Schaubühne, Lenin, and it was about the last year of Lenin's life, and yes, it was very brilliant. And yes, I think that this is a part of mobility too, actually. But of course, the aesthetics are still aesthetics of Milorau in Moscow, in Schaubühne, in Ghent, in yes, everywhere.
I just wanted to tell that just this morning I was thinking about it. I was talking with my friend from Sweden, who's crazy about Japan, and she was telling me that she's taking lessons of Japanese language by Skype. So I was thinking that probably earlier, if I crazy about Japan or Japan art, I would like to go to Japan, and I force myself and I do something to visit Japan. And now I have Skype is enough, probably. Or or if we're talking about theater or performance, if it's quite difficult to move to Schengen area, for example, for me, I can just see like live translation from of the performance from theater. So this from the one side, it's about reception of the art. You know, like everything is my mobile phone. And from the other side, it's about, you know, like when it's in presence of the artist. You know, I can join it by myself, by all me, you know, or it's just like a small screen, and this small screen helps me to sit at home, but not be mobile, you know. If you understand what I mean.
It's like a substitute in a way. Yes. And then the question is, do we then become a world of substitutes, of course, where I'm right now in a third production with a fantastic dramaturg, Sodia Lodka, who most of our rehearsals with her are via Skype. Yeah. And it's weird, and it changes something. So because this mobility, yes, it's great because you feel like you're free, yes, like you can do it, but on the other hand, of course, it forces a situation which you are stuck in later on. And it's not because you can't do something else, sometimes it is, but very often it is because you create a system where you go back to it all the time, where this becomes your basis. And then it's not like, it's not like everything becomes liquid, like you become, you know, some weird thing. No, there are very specific effects of that. Like you only come up with certain ideas because you cannot come up with, say, a choreographic idea because you're stuck in the little screen. You can't really show something because you're stuck in the little screen. What you can do is you can take the phone and you can, you know, do the thing that we should be doing here, which is moving to another space and using this opportunity so somebody can feel some sort of physical change. But besides that, you're suddenly creating another mode of presence, which is, well, I think that's why we're here, right? It's that we feel that there's something really kind of eerie about it. Like
even if there are some people watching us, you know, via Facebook,
yeah, but there are many more here. But there are many more here than are watching us, and I think that should tell us something.
Yeah, he says that yes. You're right. Yeah. If you have some questions and if you would like to join maybe the conversation.
My question is, do I get it well that we can say that the information is mobile? This is what we can say, it's mobile, and we transport this information and it's getting faster and easier, and this is so complex at a certain point, but that the creation itself is not mobile, that this is something that is rooted and is framed in kind of a structure, and aesthetics is related to creation, no?
But that would be easy, no? That would be like, okay, we have it solved.
I just wanted to ask if I follow your thought.
I think there's a great attack on, because it's an attack on this stable identity, right? And it's not about Bauman. It's really, as we all know, it's like going from everywhere. And I just read a kind of maybe critique of Butler, where, well, the basic idea was Butler puts us in a situation where she destroys this idea of subjectivity or agency without substituting it with anything else. So we're stuck in a world where we don't really know what we have left. We kind of have to build everything anew. Or if not Butler, at least, let's say, this wider area of people who kind of are inspired by her. And this counter idea was, well, maybe we're attacking the wrong thing. Maybe it's not the subject, because something is definitely changing when I talk on Skype all the time. But maybe it's not the subject. Maybe the word is a little bit going too far. So the proposal was to say that it's the position of the subject that changes, which is fundamental for what the subject is, right? It's really important where I'm speaking from, but it doesn't just do away with everything as if it was just something that I can throw out and say, okay, now that we're talking on Skype, I'm not myself.
Maybe someone else has a question?
So I will back to the question of origin and originality, because when you said, or when we talk about, you know, like this global flow, you know, like talking about Bauman, etc. But on the other hand, we see this, or I see at least this shift to the right-wing ideas, which are very focused on the locality. And do you think that origin is still important? Origin also as your homeland, your place that you belong to, your tradition, maybe your memory? Is it still something in which we can look an originality?
I just want to say about borders.
Okay.
Because I think that this right-wing turn yes, is about maybe it's our constant possession to build new borders. Now Poland is a part of European Union, and but there is a new border between Russia and Poland, you know, and of course we a lot of us, most of us, are afraid of these very strong migration flows, and we are trying to build borders between Christian world and Muslim world, and etc. And in terms of art, I think that maybe our aim is to reveal these borders, these new borders, and to invent ways how to penetrate them, how to destroy them, maybe artistically.
Yeah, because these borders are not only those physical ones that exist, but also mental borders between people, between borders that are closing our minds and doesn't allow us to be open on something new, something maybe more radical.
Yes, and to develop our art aesthetics.
But the Polish border still exists, and I'm quite happy with it.
But you mean the eastern border?
No, all the borders of Poland still exist.
Yes, you know, I'm speaking not about physical borders, but about ideological borders.
But I think it's really important, because I think, for me at least, the idea is not to have the borders disappear. I really like being different. I really like the fact that somebody has a very different perspective from mine, and that I have to cross this border to go to somebody else's world. And I think in art, that is one of the great pleasures of art, right? It's that I suddenly find myself in another country. The problem is, of course, when this border is not a border that I can cross, or that somebody else can cross, when it becomes the symbol of something where it's like, well, no. And that's when we have one of these two very different ideas of mobility which we had here. One which was, in one presentation, I don't know if you've noticed, mobility was kind of synonymous with freedom. So that's the perspective of, like, we don't want the borders because we want you to be free to go somewhere else, where the other one is almost the contrary. It's like, well, mobility is this disaster of everyone being completely, constantly having to move around and being here and being there and going there and answering the phone and listening to the conference while checking your emails or mine, and being just everywhere and nowhere because there are no borders.
I think you are talking about maybe something like identity. Yes, because of course I don't want to lose my identity, and it's, of course, it's based on Russian culture and Russian history and even Soviet Union history, and etc. Of course, my perspective is built on these fundamental topics.
Yeah, but you talk about borders, you know, something that it shows our different views. And this is, of course, something light. I mean, it's good to be different, and it's good to exchange our experiences, ideas. But the borders can be also something really strong and something that wants to divide us. And it doesn't want to find this place in which we can discuss, but can only show a completely dichotomy between ourselves. And this is, I think, the very big danger, you know, or a threat that we also have to face.
I'm thinking of, I'm trying to relate it to go back from these big ideas to my work and what I do, and that this is one of the things I have to deal with all the time, and which is really frustrating, and I try to acknowledge it, but it's never really over. It's kind of negotiating your position and negotiating with yourself how much you are going to build or allow these borders to exist in the work you do towards the rest of the world. And I will translate that. I make a work which is related to, say, to my country, to Poland. I just recently made a work which was called The Polacks Explain the Future. The Polacks, the Poles. It's also a brother and sister who are called Polak. Their last name is Polak. And for a big amount of time, I kept thinking, is it going to be understood by somebody who's not Polish? And what do I need to do for this to be understood by somebody who's not Polish? Why would I ask myself this question? Because I want my show to tour, because I'm an international artist, because I know that most of my colleagues and friends and festivals and places that I know are part of this big scene. And it's not just about the money. It's about being part of a universe and feeling part of the universe, but at the same time, and being visible in this universe, but at the same time, and this is the horrible thing, I am losing things which are mine and which are just Polish. Only the Poles are going to get some jokes. And it could have been a show which would be only understandable to Poles, and the Poles are specialists in that, by the way. There are some festivals, international festivals you go to, I will not name them, but if you want later on, I can tell you, where the curators come from all over the world and they watch the shows and they're like, that must be really interesting for people from your country. And at first you feel this is ridiculous, this doesn't make sense. Well, no, it doesn't make sense for the international audience. It makes a lot of sense for the local audience. And then the question for me as an artist is, I can really decide, and then I can decide where these borders suddenly are strong borders which you cannot penetrate or which are esoteric to the people from the outside. And yes, especially the people from the West are going to look at them condescendingly and look at them and kind of nod and say, oh yeah, you're doing your things there. But I can choose to do that, and I've recently been thinking about the value of that as opposed to the value of, let's have one universal language where all the fucking curators from the world are going to get it. They're going to get the joke, they're going to understand it, I'll explain everything.
Olga, do you want to comment?
Yes, first I'd like to say that last year we had a performance of Jan Fabre, Belgian Rose, on International Theatre Festival in Moscow. It was, you know, everybody understood everything, but we have a small dictionary. We have a small dictionary with.
For me, it
not
was
everybody.
quite boring. Yes.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Well, okay, I'm talking about myself and probably my friends. Me and my friends understood everything, and for us it was interesting. It was not a problem. Firstly, and second thing I'd like to say that probably this. I'm Belarusian in any country, and this origin and originality is inside me. So it doesn't matter if I live in Russia or probably German or United States. So it's like a question of my personal integrity. If I can keep it inside me, I'm fine. And I don't think that it's like a kind of expansion from all over the world for my originality. And the second thing, I think, is that probably when we are talking about in culture, when we are talking about our personal originality, it's good when we deal with cultural traditions probably, and past and present of our countries and culture, when it's a kind of research. But when it's a fake ideological abuse, or like a kind of manipulation, it's I think this is a problem. You know, this is the main problem we are talking about. Not about that somebody will not understand our, you know, that your performance for Polish people, but when it's about like fake ideological values or something like this, when I think it's quite popular probably now in Russia. It appears one after another, such kind of artistic works. So this is a problem.
But there was this, sorry, there was this Belarusian theater, Belarusian documentary theater, which traveled to, I remember, to Edinburgh also, but to the UK, and it was quite, there was, you know, quite a lot of noise around it.
Yes,
and
yes,
then
it's
I
a free
remember,
theater, free theater.
Yeah, and then I remember a review which said, well, it's probably interesting from the Belarusian context because they tell all these stories which are probably important from their perspective, but as a theater, it's naive because they just tell these stories and, well.
Yeah, they just like telling about stories about Belarus, you know, just to let everybody know that Belarus exists. Yeah, it's something like this. Theater is about it.
So would you say which category does that, is this part of?
I think it's third category.
And I want to tell you the story of my performance, Out of the Closet. It's about gays coming out. And I made it 2 years ago. And this summer, the performance was invited, and everybody, a lot of people said that this is a very revolutionary and etc. for Russia, because in Russia we are still discussing the question if gays can be at all, if it's acceptable or not. Yes, and but we switched the focus on coming out and on relationships between moms and their sons, and it quite touching show, and some people from audience are crying, etc. But a lot of people said that this is only a documentary show for Russia, because this question isn't solved in Russia, but abroad, where in countries where the gays marriage acceptable, etc., etc. Nobody could be interested in it. But this summer, the show was invited to Stockholm. There was a special theater festival during the Pride. And yes, the reaction of the audience in Stockholm was the same as in Russia, with tears, etc. And for them it was very important too. And yes, it's about this boring documentary performance where people just telling their stories. Yes, and the audience and experts in Stockholm said that it's extremely new way to talk about this topic. So I think maybe the problem is the problem of curating, really, because of course they are just yes, human beings, and maybe sometimes they are afraid to invite these documentary shows because of language barrier. But the audience can accept quite maybe more than curators.
I think it's a beautiful idea of a curator as this alchemist of mobility, somebody who can cure us of the panic of mobility, you know.
Yeah, but I think that, well, I just want to add that this festival was co-organized by ITI in Stockholm, and Ulrika was sending materials about that, and I think that she asked to distribute. No, not you. Okay, because I was added to the mailing list, and I know that they have some materials about the festival itself, and they are looking for international partners from all over Europe. So I'm sure that if this topic somehow is emerging for any of your organizations, it would be, you know, like great to contact her. Are there any questions from the Jorayan?
Yeah, maybe I'm one of those curators sitting here now, and we invited Theater Doc some 6 years ago with grandchildren, the show by Misha. But my point here is, I mean, there is quite a intense discussion about borders closed, borders open, mobility, originality. Maybe a bit out of focus is the position of the audience, which is often not mobile. And if you think about your audience, and Wojtek in a way formulated it, well, let's make it for them who are sitting here. And then I've been in, I think the festival you mentioned before, then it can be that you sit there and you don't get the clue because the codes are unreadable, but you see there are codes. What do you do as a curator then, or what do I do? I have sort of 3 lines of trying to figure out if I can invite it to my festival in Switzerland. And those 3 lines are, I'm not sure if they are important, but I thought maybe I just throw them in. The first line is, do I really get what it is about? I mean, not the storyline and the plot, but sort of what is the substance being taken into the hands and being sort of dealt with. The second point is, the second layer of looking into it is, does it enrich my senses as it did not before? Is there something going beyond my normal way of perception, hearing, seeing, understanding, going to different levels of understanding? If it does this, then it means something is there which I cannot directly only grasp by my intellect. But there is something which shows there's another level of imagination or of possible layers which I sense and feel. But since I know that it is about something which I can grasp, I let those overtones sound with it. Okay? The third level is very important for this discussion, I think. But then I have to think about, I bring it to Switzerland, a fucking boring country. It's a sanatorium of Europe. Can they understand it? Can they relate to it? Is it translatable? Is it transferable? And yes, many things are, of course, and some are not. And then you make a choice. So on this third level, you cannot do it. Even the others might work. But often you see 80% of the shows where the first thing is unclear. What is it really about? Because theaters are making stuff which are just obliged to produce theater. But it's not clear what it's really about, other than let's put something on stage. So then it's missing already the first point, because it must be about something of our time, of the social reality we're living in. Otherwise, why inviting something? So maybe food for thought.
Thank you.
I just want to notice one thing, that at the very end you said of our time and that we are. And this is the moment where it becomes interesting, because then the question is, who is the we? Who is part of the we? You know, because if you manage to extend it to this, between your audience, your Swiss audience, and the show, and the show's audience at the place where it's shown first, then fantastic, we have a common we. Otherwise, then the we's are different we's. So this is the thing that always fascinates me about the moment where we go to the common, and the common becomes really something where I'm really defining my standing point, and where it's really becoming hard. Just it's the theory.
No, I think that this we, I agree with you. It can be a common we, but I also meant it. Is it for the we I sort of try to represent? And since it is translatable, there is a common part of we. If it's about the gay culture, even though we are much further in Switzerland, there is still a lot around the topic. And it's not the same as in Russia, it's not the same as in Poland. I mean, Poland just 2 days ago had a scandal again in the European Union. But still there are references where things can be read as we.
By the way, I had a fantastic example of the limits of that, which was, so one gesture, which was the show you mentioned, with deaf performers showing different aspects of sign language. And it's been touring everywhere, and it's really successful, and we're super happy about it. In Switzerland, by the way, also in many other places where I would expect that the situation of the deaf would be much better, and that they would be having much more trouble relating to this story. And we were really excited about it, and then there were some curators from the US who were super interested in it. They hadn't seen it, but they heard about it, and they read about it, and they were like, yes, we're taking it. We're going to show it, fantastic. We have a whole deaf community that's super active in the arts, etc. Just send us the video. We sent the video, and they said, sorry, we're not going to take it. And I was completely shocked. And I started kind of pressuring them to explain, and they ended up writing a long email explaining basically that in the US, this is something which has been worked through already, and that they're so far ahead, actually, yes, it is a progress, that this show is retro for them. It's like something that is absolutely, where there is no we, where the curator couldn't imagine a translation which would allow this to be of value for that audience. And I was really upset, but the longer I thought about it, the more I understood, yes, there are limits, and that's okay.
Even though I must say that for you, this show, I just want to answer this, and then I give away the microphone. Sorry. For me, the show, I saw the show, your show in Jest, but the only readable line is not only about deaf people. There are many other lines which you can read and then use for many other translations. So poor Americans, they don't see this.
Yeah, I will add to this before I leave you the floor. That this discussion about the LGBT performances or about disabled people or artists, in your case, it actually also shows that the context changes in many countries. I mean, we have to think about it, that some of these topics, who would think that, I don't know, Trump will gonna win, and really situation of women, LGBT movements, etc., is also changing in US. Even if 3 years ago we would say, everything is clear, they already reworked so many things, and you know it will not come back. And yeah, and yeah, but somehow it's not like the story is already, you know, and everything is done and reworked.
I wanted to elaborate on your point of the audience and also relation to local communities, and this idea that we wish that there is really a meaningful dialogue between artists and local communities. But at several points in the discussion, you see that the current system of producing and touring is just not fit for that. Because indeed, as you said, because of the system of visibility, you are forced to kind of like work in a very generic way. So therefore, I think it's really important to question the conditions in which we produce, and then maybe talk also not only about the touring, but also about residencies, in that sense that, of course, there are a lot of residency places, but also there you can see that the conditions of the residency places do not really allow for this meaningful exchange, in this sense that often the time you need for a residency is just too short. So it's important also, I think, to talk about residence in this aspect, and also the parameters and the conditions you need also for residencies to create this dialogue. And I was just kind of also in our trajectory quite inspired by an artist from Belgium, Hans Brissink, who refused at a certain point to start working in residencies that are shorter than a 3-month period, right? And he moved to Colombia, and he set up a project there as a Belgian artist trying to become a Colombian performer, assembling a band with local musicians and playing the Colombian nationalist music repertoire. And that is a kind of like an interesting process where it's also quite meaningful that he, as a foreigner, just in the way as Milo Rao was mentioned, there's some things in local communities that you can only do when you are a foreigner, when you are an outsider. And that is the thing which we should look for, where these international collaborations are meaningful, and rather as something which you are forced to do because the economic conditions want us to. So.
Any comments? Are there any more questions or just the thoughts that you would like to add? Yeah.
Well, hi. Would you agree with the statement that mobility puts aesthetics in danger? I mean, when you hear... No, I'm asking if you, all of you, if you'd agree with that. Because once you hear that somebody did not like your show in the US, and then next time you try to create something, you subconsciously consider that fact, and then you try to make something more global, more universal, or maybe generic. I'm just speculating right now, but this puts your aesthetics in terms of being original, true to your origins, in danger.
I think it's a huge topic. It's right on the spot with the conference. I don't know if I would have like even a personal short reply. I think the word generic is risky. I don't have a problem with huge American hits, like musical hits that are just like This Is America. You know, probably most of you know This Is America by Childish Gambino. If you don't, you should. Because it's a really great work about America. It's local and it's universal. Is it generic because of that? I don't know. I suppose something from the US cannot be generic because they dominate still. So I'm in a worse position where I just made this piece and there's a big, very brilliant festival and venue in Europe which wants this piece, but they want it in Polish. And now I'm making an English version of it. And I really think that the English version is the thing that people should see because they will understand it. But they want it in Polish. Because it sounds great. Of course, because it's then they feel the, you know, the special thing of the Polish language. And maybe I'm doing the generic thing by wanting it to be English so everyone understands it, or maybe they want the generic thing of everyone coming exactly from the Belarus, from Russia, from the specific point, and being local enough so that we can feel your locality in just the right proportions for us. So I think it's a kind of double-edged sword where yes, I can be working in a direction which is risky because then I kind of take away this beauty of the Polish language. On the other hand, nobody would ask a Norwegian theater group that's making a piece to not present it in English. And there are many, you know, Norwegian and Swedish and Danish and German groups that have English versions of their shows. And it would never, ever come across the mind of a curator to say, that's great that you have an English version, now show us the Dutch version. So I guess I'm kind of going around this question. But like, to be perfectly honest, yes, I think there's a risk. It's not a risk of the aesthetics disappearing. It's a risk of it kind of washing away. So you're moving only towards a territory which is a common territory. And I think every artist who is going somewhere and showing something to a wider audience has that at some level. It can be very big, it can be like a big issue, do we make it a pop song or not? Or it can be something that is very gentle and subtle, like me working on a personal autobiographic work and realizing that almost nobody's going to understand this and this reference, so I better not include this. And then am I washing away the genuine character, local character of it, or am I negotiating with the audience? And I think it's for anyone to judge, but to be conscious of that, I think it's really important, because otherwise you end up doing just generic work, and then it becomes generic. And we all know artists, I think especially, for instance, in Poland, there's a whole current right now of artists doing contemporary performance work, which is generic, which is, we know where they, you know, what Jan Faber or other Milo Rau, they watched and tried to there's a word for that. Instead of imitate, there's a nicer word for it. Emulate, there you go.
Let's say last comment, okay?
Okay, thanks. I'll keep it short. I'm not a theater expert. I'm a data nerd. I'm listening to this in awe, like, wow, what's all coming to me? I have the impression that in the discussion about borders, categories, in fact, the concept of being original, authentic, sometimes, that the topic of the conference, mobility of aesthetics, is seen as, let's build a nice package of an authentic aesthetic that can be shown. And if people don't accept my nice package of authentic aesthetics, then I'm a little bit, I'm a bit worried about it. There might be some dynamic that you then revisit your authentic aesthetic and you endanger it by making it more generic. Is that really what the mobility of aesthetic is about? I was very appreciative of Nina's thing where the aesthetic, where you sort of give up on the authenticity of a certain aesthetic. You just allow it to be, I'm going to use that awful word, be in flux. It's not packaged. There is no border around it. It's a momentary combination of being on Skype and having the Turkish football on and being in a room in Brussels that was originally a Flemish bar that is then occupied by I don't know what. The discussion was very structuralistic, border-oriented, authentic-oriented, and what I felt in Nina's thing, and that's also what I think we tried to point out in our presentation. Where is this leading us? So, where is this leading us? Isn't there something more productive to talk about? So just...
Sorry, I think you have to propose something more productive to talk about if you want to say, isn't there something else? Otherwise, you're leaving us in a very sad position.
But let's have a few beers on that.
But I think that it's a great conclusion for the next days, because you're going to have still some time to talk about it and discuss. And I know that you need to go to the theater performance, so
But I have to answer.
yeah, you have to answer. Okay, so like postscriptum, a postscriptum by Wojtek Ziemilski.
Yeah, I think it's always nice to say, isn't there something else that's productive and something that's more in flux and that's more open to everyone? And where all these different angles appear, and you go somewhere else and you become a bit of something else, and you are all kind of combined in these weird ways which were unpredictable. You move to a different country, you move several times, you show it in several places, then you come back and you're somebody different. Then you come from Turkey, and then somebody from Bosnia meets you via Finland, goes here, and then she comes there and she sees something. And all this is so much more enriching than this idea that there's a structure which is where you come from. Where do you come from? You come from Poland. Okay, so are you doing your Polish work? Or not, which is this kind of classic dichotomy. But I think this division between the world of structuralism, where you have one origin, Polish, and this is what you represent, And on the other hand, you have the wonderful of globalization, which is complex and difficult and has its problems, but it brings us all these wonderful flowers. It's just a bad opposition to make. It's bad, and it's a bad position to start it from if you're a white male from a rich country dressed in a shirt and in glasses and in shoes and in jeans, and you have all the attributes of somebody who is in power and is in the very center of power and of privilege. And so the happiness and joy with which you want to encourage us to search other options of finding different sources of identity, I think at the best, in the best possible version, it's naive. And in the worst, it's putting us here in a position of these poor Easterners who still don't get it, that there's a rich world of diversity which mingles in different ways, and they still are stuck in their questions of one border and one source and one authenticity that you have to protect or not. If we came out like that, I think all of us are sorry, because that was not the goal. The goal was to overcome a certain wall which has appeared in front of the postmodernist or post-structuralist ideas that seemed to be bringing us to this wonderful world of richness and enriching us in all sorts of ways, and is crashing hard in many, many ways. So the question is, what do we do about it now? How do we deal with the world where Bauman is not enough, where living together in Brussels and finding how fantastic it is not enough, because the issues are really serious, and the identities that are hiding behind it are hardcore, concrete, and they bring in things, and they are spectacles of all sorts, and now let's try and deal with them. That is, I think, the challenge here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.